Hello, classmates. Steve Quintana here. Today, I'm going to bring to you my final paper presentation. I wrote my paper based on the effects of Western colonization had on Alaska Native cultures. I'll talk a little bit about the state of Alaska and maybe brought some of these people to the state. Talk about some of the Alaska Native tribes within the state. Talk about when the first contact was made from Western society. We'll talk about some of the cultural things, or actually about some culture things about the Alaska Natives. Also talk about some of the good things and the bad things that were introduced to the culture. Talk a little bit about subsistence activities, the missionaries. Take a look at modern Alaska, and then finally wrap it all up for a quick summary. But what does all this mean? When we talk about Alaska Native cultures and Western societies, a lot of times we think about the the new missionaries possibly, or we talk about the the explorers that were exploring these great vast lands. Alaska had a lot to offer, a lot of natural resources. The beauty of the state was, I think, one of the really big drives. Once they, I think the Russian fur traders first seen that there's a lot of fur-bearing animals within the state, they wanted to capitalize on that. But let's take a look at the size of the state. Pretty much, from the Aleutian Islands all the way down to the panhandle of Alaska, pretty much spans the entire United States. So you can see by size, it was pretty expansive, and a lot of indigenous people lived within these confines, and many of the explorers, explored, found the Aleutian Islands as they migrated over from Russia to explore this new land, and then those that were coming down from the continental United States explored the southeast Alaska Panhandle. So here you can see the traditional, or the Alaska Native cultures and the different tribes that lived in these various parts of Alaska. The Inupiaq up north, the Yupik, and the central western area of Alaska, the Athabascans in the more of the central portion of the state. You had the Alituk. Okay, I'm sorry, I can't pronounce some of these words, but living out in the Bering Sea Islands, the Aleutian Islands, and then in the southeastern panhandle, the Eyak, Haida, Shimshian, and the Tlingit. I apologize if I'm hacking up these the tribal names, but this is pretty much the makeup of the tribes within the state. So many of the first contacts were made, as the Russians were coming through to explore these new lands out in these Aleutian Islands, and the Americans coming and visiting the southeastern panhandle of the state. So as we talk about the Western contact with the indigenous people of Alaska, as I was reading in some of the materials, in 1741, a Russian expedition led by Vitus Bering, along with George Steller, made the first discovery of Alaska, landing on or near what today is Kayak Island. Bering explored the western coast of Alaska until he was shipwrecked and died on Komodorsky Island, later named Bering Island. So, as you can see, Vitus Bering had a big impact on the state of Alaska. Obviously, they named the Bering Straits and the Bering Sea after him, but he was one of the first to make contact with the indigenous people of Alaska. And as you can see, it was the folks that lived within the Aleutian Islands. They had the first dose of the Western world. So in the end, was making contact with the Western world. So was this really a good thing? You can look at it in various perspectives. Maybe we brought some of the modern technologies, new tools, new ways to hunt, new ways to fish, and possibly some not so good things. The native people were a closed community, weren't exposed to a lot of outside um, uh, influences, various culture, and even in disease type things. I think the first explorers coming, looking for new lands, they would see the state of Alaska, the coastline, how beautiful it was. I think that was probably one of the initial drives of wanting to explore even further. Even though it was up in the north in the Arctic lands, Alaska is a very beautiful state. Has a lot of natural resources, as we all know. A lot of animals to hunt, a lot of sea creatures to hunt. That's what the Russian fur traders found. They found the sea otters and fur-bearing animals, which was, at the time they were seeking to get more of. So they found a state that had a lot of these resources, and therefore brought people to the Alaska Native people. So what did the Westerners bring? Some disease and sicknesses. A lot of the indigenous people, they weren't didn't have they weren't heavily exposed to these various diseases, and so they weren't prepared for what was about to happen. So some of the things, people came and we just came and destroyed, and didn't really want to get to know the indigenous people. Came to take. A lot of times ended up in death and destruction for the Alaskan Native people. They tried to defend their lands, their hunting grounds. Western people were not really looking to relinquish anything, so we're moving forward, and confrontation leads to fighting, and fighting kind of leads into not so good things. But we did bring some education. A lot of the missionaries came with education and medical care. Modern technologies, running water, the things that they felt that these indigenous folks needed. I think they felt that maybe they were unlearned people, and they wanted to bring some education. Modern conveniences, we talked about those. A lot of these modern conveniences, I think, enabled the Alaskan Natives to have a less reliance on some of the subsistence activities that they once partook in, such as gathering, water gathering, ice, and those things. Hunting became a lot easier for them with the guns and the snow machines. I know that came later, after first contact, but new tools and hunting paraphernalia really made things a lot easier for them. Obviously, missionaries brought religion. Many times, religion was imposed upon these people. They forced them to convert in many places. Forced them to kind of denounce their traditional ways, religion, the shamans, so on and so forth. With the fur-bearing animals, brought a lot of trade. Therefore, Alaska Native at some point had various artistic things, clothing that they could trade with these new explorers. And as time went on, jobs became available to the Alaska Native people. So various jobs within the villages that they had, and trade, like I said, trading for various things that they thought was desirable from the Western people. But anyway, a lot of the native culture. Some of this probably isn't necessarily the traditional. A lot of the arts, a lot of the things that they Alaska Natives created and made, I think, kind of morphed into Western society, Western desire, what the Western people were looking for. The Americans, the Russians. I think the dressy moccasins that you see at the bottom, maybe initially were just obviously probably made out of straight leather just for purposes of wearing and keeping away from the environment. But these are some of the things that Alaskan Native cultures have made. Over in the right hand corner, the mask that we talked about in our last week's materials. Talk about how the mask kind of transformed from a ceremonial actual mask that they would wear to become more of a mask where it becomes for display. So you see how a lot of the Alaskan Native culture artwork really was really beautiful. But also a lot of the subsistence activities that take place. The old ways in the canoes and the spears, gathering, by hand as we move forward in the in modern times. Things kind of transformed into some of the modern conveniences we show here. The four-wheeler snow machines, the guns, the phones. People do taking selfies. That's very popular these days. But as you can see how traditional ways kind of morphed into the modern Alaska with a lot of the modern conveniences that makes things really easy to get around and to do things. But like I said, a lot of missionaries came and I think left their mark on Alaska. You can still see some of the buildings around the state. Some of the things they brought, maybe not so desirable, such as the boarding schools that forced the children to go to. A lot of time, like many of them, I'm not sure if all of them, but many of them did not allow them to use their native language. So I think you can see how the languages that kind of are starting to start to disappear at that time. Until recently, there's become a revival of it, but missionaries brought, obviously the religion, the education, a lot of the modern conveniences to the Alaska Native people. I know that was, obviously here we got a very beautiful state. People really, at the time, I don't think the Russians really realized what they had, and when they made the sail to the United States. But we definitely got a good deal on the state, and hopefully with a lot of the things that are transpiring with legislation and trying to bring back a lot of the Alaska Native traditional ways. Hopefully we can revive many of the languages that are starting to become extinct, so that we can be here for future generations. I think it's just it's a sad thing when old ways, old cultures kind of take shape and form of the new Western society. But in the end, I think we're making strides to kind of make things right with the native Alaska Native populations within the state. And hopefully, I provided you with a good overview of what my paper was all about. I talked a lot about the state and how big it is and how beautiful it is, and what the various tribes that lived within or they're still living within the state, but in the geographical locations that they lived in, and how things kind of transformed as the missionaries came and provided religion, education, modern conveniences, and how Alaska Native culture, the arts, things kind of moved into the modern world. And so thank you for listening, and I hope you have a good day.